The rain had turned into bullets. Not real ones, at least not yet, but that was the feeling. Each drop slammed against the rusted tin roof like a warning shot. I crouched beside the window. Glock in hand, the safety already off. In the alley below, a cat knocked over a trash can, and for a second my finger twitched. I almost fired. That's what fear does after years of looking over your shoulder. This isn't Mexico. This is Phoenix, Arizona. And it's been 8 years since I crossed that border with nothing but a fake name and a stitched-up bullet wound. But some nights like this one, I swear I'm still there, trapped in the Sonoran dust blood, on my boots, orders ringing in my ears. Back then, I served under a man the world thinks they understand, El Ruso. Ruthless, brilliant, unforgiving. But if you think he was the real boss, you haven't been paying attention. I did more than carry his orders. I watched his eyes when he received them. I saw his hands shake. I listened when he said, "This didn't come from me. It came from above. Above El Ruso." Let that sink in. The night I knew the truth, it still lives in my bones. December 17th, 2012. Sonora. The air smelled of diesel and wet concrete. We had just executed 3 men who dared question an arms shipment that had mysteriously vanished en route to Agua Prieta. 2 of them were barely out of their teens. The third, older, begged, cried. I still hear it in my dreams, how he tried to say my name before I pulled the trigger. I didn't let him finish. El Ruso was watching. So was someone else. A man with no code name, no face in the system, but everyone knew better than to ask who he was. Even El Ruso called him Señor, and when he spoke, all our radios went silent. I can't unsee what I saw that night. The way El Ruso stood 2 steps behind him. Not beside. Behind. Like a soldier. That's when I realized I was just a shadow in a war of ghosts. But that's not how this story began. No, if you want to understand how a poor kid from Navajoa became the man who held secrets that could burn down the empire of the Mayos, we have to go back. Before the blood. Before the black SUVs. Before I stopped believing in God. Let me take you there. But I'll warn you now. You think you know who runs the cartel, let me tell you who really does. I was born in a place people only mention when the violence makes the news. Navajoa, southern Sonora. Dust roads. Houses stitched together with scraps of plywood and hope. No hospitals, just prayers. No future, just survival. My mother used to say God skipped us. Maybe he'll come next year. He never did. My earliest memory is of smoke. Not from a fire, but from the crop dusters that flew over our fields, releasing chemicals that made our eyes burn and throats close. My father worked those fields until his lungs collapsed. They buried him in a cheap box wrapped in a tarp. I was 7. My mother scrubbed rich people's floors in Culiacan to keep us fed. Every Sunday she came back with a smile and bruises on her wrists. I never asked. I knew. My older brother Julio tried to protect us. He joined a local security crew, the kind that patrolled the town, pretending to be cops, pretending not to sell protection. He was 17. They found him in a ditch. 6 months later, his tongue gone, his hands broken. No one ever came to ask questions. That's how you learn early on that justice is just a bedtime story they tell rich kids. I went to school until I was 14. After that, it was the streets. I worked at a mechanic shop, then as a runner at a gas station. I was fast. I didn't ask questions. I kept my mouth shut. That made me useful, but it also made me invisible. Until one day, that changed. I was 19 working the night shift at a Pemex station off Federal Highway 15. It was dead quiet, just the hum of bugs and my cigarette burning low. A white Tacoma pulled in. Out stepped a man with tattoos creeping up his neck and a smile too calm for someone in his line of work. He wore a red tank top even though the desert night was cold. Everyone called him El Güero Camiseta. I didn't know it yet, but that man was my ticket into the underworld. He asked for gas. I filled his tank. Then he asked if I wanted to earn real money. I paused. That's all it took. That single second of hesitation of not saying no was the moment my life changed. He tossed me a burner phone and said, "Answer when it rings. Don't talk unless they ask. Don't ask anything. Not yet." That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, holding the phone like it was a bomb. I knew what it meant. Everyone in Sonora knew what a call from them meant. But still. I answered when it rang. 3 days later, I was in Caborca inside a dusty safe house surrounded by men with rifles and dead eyes. That was the first time I heard the name El Ruso. The safe house smelled like gun oil sweat and bad decisions. Everything was beige walls couch, even the dust in the air. A single oscillating fan clicked endlessly like a broken clock refusing to die. No windows, no clocks, just men sitting on plastic chairs silent, watching the door like it owed them blood. I sat on the edge of a metal cot trying to act calm, but my hands kept betraying me, fidgeting, twitching, gripping the burner phone like it was a lifeline. Then the door opened. He didn't walk in. He entered like gravity bent around him. El Ruso. I'd seen pictures, heard stories, but nothing prepared me for the presence. He wasn't loud. He wasn't even big. But his eyes, they made you feel like he already knew everything you were going to say and didn't care. He looked at me once. No words, just a scan like a butcher eyeing a slab of meat. Then he turned to El Güero and said, "If he runs, shoot him in the legs." Everyone laughed. I didn't. That night, I wasn't given a gun. I was given a job carry a duffel bag from Caborca to a car parked on the edge of the desert highway. No instructions, no questions, just walk, drop leave. I thought it was a test. I was right. The moment I handed over the bag to the man in the white Chevy Malibu, I heard the click of a rifle. From the bushes. Then the sound of bones breaking, screaming, tires peeling off. I ran. Back at the safe house, I expected punishment. But instead, El Güero handed me a cold beer and said, "Now you're in." That was my first mission. The next week, I was taken to a ranch in the outskirts of Magdalena. Horses, dogs, men with AR-15s, and a concrete pit in the back filled with burned tires and ashes. That's where they taught me how to use a gun. Not just shoot. Use. Clean it. Load it blindfolded. Dismantle it under pressure. Shoot moving targets. Shoot kneeling. Shoot without thinking. The first time I fired a live round, I flinched. The second time, I didn't. The third time, I felt power. And that's all it takes. One taste. One jolt of power running through your arms as a man twice your size backs away. That's when I stopped thinking like a mechanic and started thinking like them. A week later, El Ruso showed up again. He pointed at me and said, "You, drive." No explanation. Just me behind the wheel of a black Suburban, windows tinted with him and two others in the back. We drove in silence to a compound north of Santa Ana. Inside was a gathering. Men in suits, others in military uniforms without name tags. Deals were made. Envelopes exchanged. I wasn't asked to speak. I was there to watch. That was the first time I understood this wasn't just crime. This was structure. This was governance, a parallel system that didn't need elections or press conferences. It needed fear, loyalty, silence. When we returned, El Ruso tossed me a phone and said, "You're part of the next route. No more tests. No more questions. Just the path in front of me opening wider and darker." They didn't call it initiation. They called it clarification. As if what we were about to do was meant to clear something up about who we were, what we feared, or what we'd become. It started with a drive. We were 6, all under 25. They threw us into a van with no windows and drove us out past San Luis Rio, Colorado, into the salt flats. No words, just the wind and the sound of tires crushing bone-dry earth. When the van stopped, a man in a black cap opened the door. He tossed each of us a shovel and said, "Dig, 1 meter wide, 1 meter deep." No one asked why. After hours of breaking ground under the burning Sonoran sun, we finally understood. These weren't for training. They were graves. One of us broke. A boy from Guaymas started sobbing, said he wanted to go home, said he didn't sign up for this. They shot him in the leg, left him there while the rest of us finished digging. That night, they brought us into an abandoned warehouse outside Mexicali. The floor was blood-stained, but not fresh. The smell had settled. You only notice that kind of stench when you've been around death long enough to tell the difference between new and old. Inside, we stood in a circle, stripped of phones, wallets, even shoelaces. One by one, they made us kneel in front of a steel drum. Each of us had to tell the room why we were there, not just words, but truth. Lies got you cut. We all knew it. When it was my turn, I stared at the concrete and said, "Because I have nothing left. And if I'm going to die poor, I'd rather die feared." Silence. Then a nod. That's when they gave me the knife. Not a gun. A knife. Rusted heavy, still stained with dried blood. They brought out a man, hands tied, mouth taped. They didn't tell us what he did. They just said, "Finish what the last one started." I didn't ask who the last one was. I didn't need to. I hesitated maybe half a second. Then I stepped forward. When it was done, they didn't applaud. They didn't congratulate me. They just handed me a new phone, a clean shirt, and a patch to sew inside my jacket a wolf's head with 2 red eyes. That was it. I was now part of El Círculo, the tight inner circle under El Ruso's command. No more courier work, no more babysitting stash houses. From that moment, I was eligible for roots missions, and worst of all, names. You see, once you knew names, you couldn't leave. My first briefing came 2 days later in a trailer outfitted like a war room. Maps, photos, call logs, burner codes. We were assigned to monitor Paso de la Muerte, a deadly corridor between Sonoita and Arizona. Our job wasn't just to protect the route. It was to control the silence. Every time a whisper escaped, we erased it. And each time I obeyed, they trusted me more. What they didn't know, what even I didn't know then, was how deep this would go. That I wasn't just becoming a soldier. I was becoming a believer. The desert has no memory. That's what they told us. Bury something out there, and in a week, even the wind forgets. My first real mission wasn't glamorous. It wasn't shootouts or power plays. It was silence. Protect the route. Erase the noise. They gave me a Nissan pickup with plates from Chihuahua, 2 radios, 1 encrypted, 1 not, and a Beretta with the serial filed off. I was told to drive alone, shadow a small convoy carrying 80 kilos of product across the border to Ajo, Arizona. 3 hours of dirt roads, paid checkpoints, and one promise. If anything goes wrong, don't call us. Clean it or die trying. Halfway there, things went wrong. A rancher young, maybe my age, had set up a drone camera near the trail. Not military, just curious. Maybe hoping to catch a coyote or deer on film. He saw too much. I caught him before he could call anyone. He begged, swore he wasn't a snitch, just a photographer, had a Canon lens still hanging around his neck. His phone was locked. But that didn't matter. I had already decided. I shot him once. Then again. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was instruction. Afterward, I stood there staring at his blood soaking into the sand, mixing with his shadow. That's when it hit me. There was no applause, no reward, just a silence so thick it buzzed inside my skull. I buried the phone, crushed the camera, burned his truck, and for the first time I realized what they meant by control the silence. The next morning, I reported in. El Güero didn't ask for details, just nodded and said, "Good. Now you're ready for names." Over the next months, my assignments escalated. One time, I was ordered to retrieve a shipment that had gone missing near San Luis. Turned out, the crew had double-crossed us, tried to resell the product to a rival cell. I found them hiding in a mechanic's garage, drunk and laughing. We didn't shoot them. That would have been too easy. We zip-tied them to the back of a truck and dragged them until the skin peeled away. Then, we left their bodies strung from a bridge with a sign, "El silencio tiene dueño." Silence has an owner. At some point you stop shaking. You stop sweating. You stop thinking. You tell yourself stories. He would have talked. They betrayed us. I'm protecting the root. But deep down you know. You're becoming a tool sharpened by pain, wielded by shadows. Still, the rewards kept coming. A blacked-out truck. Rolex I never wore. Girls, guns, wads of cash I didn't even count. I was too focused on earning trust. That was the real currency. And I was climbing fast. But I also knew, maybe from the beginning, that this ladder had no top. Just more names, more silence, and a grave waiting somewhere in the desert with no memory. There's a moment somewhere between your 5th and 50th body when fear stops being something you feel and becomes something you cause. That's when they start calling you Señor. I was 24 when I got the call. It came straight from El Ruso's personal radio. No middlemen, just coordinates and a time. I arrived in a convoy of 3 trucks, all tinted, all armored. The compound was hidden behind a papaya farm near Santa Ana. Guards with suppressed rifles, cameras, wired to solar panels, drones overhead. It looked more like a forward military base than a cartel stronghold. El Ruso was waiting inside, standing over a map the size of a pool table. He didn't look up when I entered. He just said, "You'll control Route 21 now. Everything west of Puerto Peñasco is yours. People, product, problems." Then he looked me in the eye and added, "If it fails, it's your head." That was the promotion. No champagne, no ceremony, just ownership of silence in a region where betrayal outlives family. I was assigned 20 men, some loyal, some scared, none of them stupid. We operated out of a series of safe houses disguised as fishing shacks along the Gulf. Each had radios, weapons stash rooms, and concrete floors that drained well. I ran things like a business. Inventory in, money out. Every truck was tagged. Every shipment had a backup plan. Every soldier knew the rules: never ask about the client, never question an order, and never speak unless it was encrypted. The consequences were written in blood. We once had a courier who let his girlfriend take a selfie inside the stash house. Just one photo, just one post. He disappeared the next day. So did she. Her Instagram was wiped. Their apartment burned. I didn't even have to give the order. That's how deep the fear ran. The profits were obscene. I was clearing $150,000 a week, and that was just from the trafficking routes, not counting extortion, fuel theft, or service taxes we imposed on anyone operating within our corridor. I lived in a beachfront villa behind bulletproof glass, but I hardly slept. I kept 3 phones by the bed, a shotgun in the wall, and eyes in every town between Sonoita and the border. People started calling me El Sobrino, the nephew. Not because I was family, but because I was protected. Rumors said I was related to someone high up in the council. I wasn't. But I never corrected them. Fear is better when it's vague. The deeper I got, the more I noticed something. Even El Ruso had people he feared. Orders would come from nowhere. Routes changed. Operations cancelled. Payments rerouted through shell companies linked to people I'd never met, businessmen, mayors, even a bishop once. When I asked El Ruso why we were moving $2 million in crypto through a dummy NGO in Guadalajara, he simply said, "Because the owner of that NGO is more dangerous than me." That was the first time I saw him defer. It wasn't submission. It was survival. That's when it clicked. I wasn't just part of a cartel. I was part of a machine. And the higher I climbed, the more I realized we weren't at the top. We were on a leash. On the outside, we looked untouchable. Black trucks, designer weapons, Rolexes bought with blood. Girls called us phantasmas, ghosts. We moved like shadows, part myth, part muscle. Every town we entered bent before us. Cops lowered their eyes. Politicians called us investors, and club owners handed over the keys without asking what we were celebrating. But on the inside, we were wolves circling each other in the dark. The organization called itself La Fraternidad, a brotherhood, a family. But families don't install listening devices in your living room. They don't assign your closest friend to monitor your movements for irregularities. I lived in constant awareness, not fear, just precision. Each morning, I changed phones. Each week, I rotated safe houses. I spoke in codes even when I was alone, just in case. I had 5 different walk-in freezers across 3 states, not one of them for storing meat. Inside, the Fraternidad status wasn't given. It was taken. You built power by surviving the whispers. A soldier once approached me about his cut being short, calm, respectful. 2 days later, he was found inside a barrel near Guaymas Skin, bloated from diesel. That message wasn't from me. It came from above. We had rules, no attachments, no romantic partners who didn't belong to the life, no unapproved family visits, no long phone calls, especially not at night. We called it ghost time. If you broke ghost time, you became a target. I learned that lesson the hard way. One of my lieutenants, Chapo Rigo, had been with me since the early days. Smart, ruthless, loyal, or so I thought. We shared meals, stories, even buried bodies side by side. Then I caught wind of something. A pattern. Rigo always made a private call after shipments were moved. Different numbers, different SIMs. I confronted him gently. He laughed, said he was calling his sister in Hermosillo. I let it go. 3 days later, 2 stash houses were hit. One in Magdalena, one in Puerto Peñasco. Clean jobs like someone had drawn them a map. Rigo disappeared that night. Gone. No phone. No goodbye. Just silence. I never saw him again. But I got the message. Trust is earned daily. Loyalty is rented hourly. Still, there were moments, brief, dangerous moments, when we let ourselves breathe. The parties were legendary. Imagine a hacienda in the mountains strung with lights and guarded by ex-soldiers, a pool filled with champagne. Narco corridos played live by bands flown in on private jets, women who never asked your name, laughter that echoed like gunfire. But it was always a mask. One night during a party outside Caborca, a man joked about El Ruso's haircut. The music stopped. By morning, he was missing. We never mentioned his name again. Behind every smile was a calculation. Behind every toast, a hidden blade. We weren't celebrating. We were watching. Always. Because in La Fraternidad, the moment you let your guard down is the moment they decide how to replace you. And they always have someone ready. There's a level above power that doesn't speak in orders or bullets. It speaks in silence. It moves without names. And it never shows up in mugshots. I learned that in a bar in Hermosillo. It was supposed to be a simple night, just drinks with a local accountant who handled crypto laundering for one of our front companies. Nothing fancy, just spreadsheets and tequila, until a man walked in wearing a navy linen suit, no tie, and a watch worth more than the bar. No bodyguards, no entourage. He slid into the booth across from us like he owned the place. And maybe he did. The accountant froze, literally froze like his lungs forgot how to work. The man looked at me and said, "You're the one from Route 21. I didn't respond, not out of fear, out of confusion. He wasn't Cartel. He didn't carry himself like a capo. He was calm, measured, like a surgeon watching a patient bleed out slowly. Then he smiled and said, "You've been efficient." The council noticed. The council. That was the first time I heard it spoken aloud. Not Los Mayos, not El Cartel, not even La Fraternidad. He said, "The council," like something ancient, like something permanent. He slid a black folder across the table. Inside were photographs, satellite shots, bank transfers, emails, internal DEA memos about me, my roots, my men, even photos of me with El Ruso at a private airstrip in Sonora. "These are already archived," he said, "but they'll stay that way, if you stay aligned." That's when it hit me. This wasn't blackmail. This was recruitment. I asked him one question. "Who are you?" He looked genuinely amused. Then he said, "I'm nobody. That's why I'm alive." 2 days later, I was called to a meeting deep in the mountains. It wasn't organized by El Ruso. He was there, but seated off to the side, not at the head of the table. At the center sat 3 men. None of them had names. No aliases. No criminal records. Just suits, satellite phones, and briefcases. One of them spoke in perfect accentless Spanish. "We don't run drugs. We manage interests." They laid it out like a quarterly report, control of politicians in 3 northern states, military cooperation routes with embedded intelligence assets, a media network to spin violence as local disputes, crypto pipelines using shell charities registered in Switzerland. You are not cartel. You are asset. Assets can grow or expire. El Ruso didn't say a word. I understood then that all this time we had been playing narco checkers on a board built for chess. I left that meeting with a new satellite phone, a new number, and a new assignment coordinate shipments along a coastal route to benefit offshore investors I'd never meet. It didn't feel like crime anymore. It felt like government. And suddenly, all those bodies I'd buried in the desert, they weren't the secret. This was. Because if the world ever found out who truly funds the blood in Sonora, who profits from it, every so-called cartel would look like a footnote. And I was standing in the preface to something far bigger. The call came at 2:14 a.m. No name, no voice, just a single phrase whispered in static. "They know." I didn't ask who they were. In this world, the question never matters, only the escape. Within 15 minutes, I was in the back seat of a black Hilux stripped of all phones, all ID, driving south through dust and panic. My men, what was left of them, didn't ask questions. They just drove. Hours earlier, a shipment had gone missing near Puerto Libertad. 40 kilos of synthetic fentanyl. Gone. Not stolen, erased. GPS jammed. Guards dead. No witnesses. But this wasn't a rival hit. This was internal. The kind of disappearance that only happens when someone up high decides to burn a piece off the chessboard to keep the rest in play. That piece was me. By the time we reached Caborca, 2 of my safe houses had already been torched, my crypto wallets emptied, my accounts frozen. My own men were whispering into phones when they thought I wasn't listening. I confronted El Ruso, met him at the ranch near Magdalena. Just the 2 of us. No guards, no words at first. Just that silence, the kind you only hear before a gunfight or a funeral. He lit a cigarette and said, "It's not personal." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was true. I was never family. I was useful. And now I was a liability. He offered me one option: disappear. Leave. Now. And never speak of what you saw in the mountains. I wanted to kill him, but I also wanted to live. So I ran. I used an old coyote contact from my earliest days, the same man who once smuggled prostitutes across for parties in Rocky Point. He owed me a favor. I cashed it in. But before I crossed, I made one last mistake. I called my mother. She answered with that tired voice she always used when she knew it was dangerous to speak. I told her I was okay, that I loved her, that I was getting out. She said, "They've been watching the house." I told her to pack a bag, that I'd send someone. The line went dead. 2 days later, I got the photos. Her body in the kitchen, face down, slippers still on. The message was clear. Silence isn't an option. It's an oath. They didn't kill her because she knew anything. They killed her because I did. I crossed the border that same night through a storm drain beneath Nogales, came up in a warehouse filled with rotting produce and rats the size of dogs. I traded the last of my jewelry for a passport, a new name, and a fake backstory. Since then, I've changed homes every 6 months, changed phones every 2. I haven't used my real name in 8 years. But it doesn't matter how far you run. When you've held the truth in your hands, truth that could tear down empires, you never really escape. You just wait for the knock. Some nights, I wake up before the knock, before the dream ends, before the breath leaves my lungs. I wake up and listen not to the door, but to the silence behind it. Because when you've lived among ghosts, silence becomes the loudest sound you know. It's been 8 years. 8 years since I ran. Since I traded power for paranoia, money for anonymity, fear for freedom that never really came. I live in a small house now, somewhere in America. You'd never find it on a map, not because it doesn't exist, but because I no longer do. My name is fake. My papers are flawless. I work a dead-end job, smile at neighbors, tip well, keep my head down. But every night when I close my eyes, I see the map. The one in El Ruso's war room. The one where we weren't just routes and ports, we were resources. Pawns. I see the folder the council gave me. The one filled with satellite images of politicians, DEA agents, Wall Street, accounts all tied together like veins in a living organism that fed on chaos. And I wonder, what would happen if the world saw that? Not the gunfights, not the headlines, but the architecture of corruption. The way governments looked the other way, the way banks cleaned the blood, the way power passed from cartels to cabinets without ever changing hands. I've recorded everything. Not for revenge, not for redemption, but because truth once buried becomes a weapon. There's a hard drive sealed in concrete, coordinates memorized. In case I don't wake up, in case the knock comes, in case someone out there still believes that justice isn't just a bedtime story. And if you're listening to this now, if you're hearing these words, it means one of two things. Either I finally found the courage to speak, or they found me first. But before I go, I want to leave you with this. You think you know who runs the cartels. You think it's the men with guns, with face tattoos, with gold chains and songs written about them. The real boss wears no mask. He doesn't show up in corridors. He doesn't run from the law because he is the law. He sits behind desks, signs contracts, hosts charity galas, and when men like El Ruso or me get too close to the truth, he erases us like pencil on paper. So, remember this. The most dangerous criminal is not the one you fear. It's the one you vote for. And if I disappear after this, don't look for me. Look for him.